30 years. That's how long I wiped the drool from my mother's chin and spoon-fed her pureed peas. I gave up my 20s, my career, my sanity, my reward. She told the police I was poisoning her just so my deadbeat brother could inherit the house. I died in a concrete cell, choking on the injustice. But then, I opened my eyes. It was 1996 again, the day she fell down the stairs. This time, I packed a bag. Dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon sunlight, suspended like tiny mocking stars. I stared at them, my breath catching in a throat that felt bruised. I was supposed to be dead. I distinctly remembered the fluorescent hum of the prison infirmary, the sharp sting of the IV in my frail arm, and the crushing weight in my chest as my heart finally gave out. Instead, I was sitting on the edge of a floral bedspread, my childhood bedspread, the one with the faded pink peonies. I looked down at my hands. They were smooth. The knobby, arthritis-gnarled joints were gone. The permanent smell of bleach and pureed carrots that had clung to my skin for 30 years had vanished. I flexed my fingers, marveling at the frictionless movement. I rushed to the vanity mirror, nearly tripping over a stack of college textbooks. A 22-year-old face stared back. No deep grooves around the mouth from decades of forced smiles. No hollow, exhausted eyes. My digital alarm clock blinked glowing red numbers. October 14th, 1996, 2 p.m., a cold shiver violently rattled my spine. It was the day. For 3 decades, I had replayed this exact afternoon, in my head, dissecting it, wishing I could carve it out of the timeline. In exactly 15 minutes, my mother Martha would attempt to carry a box of old winter coats down the steep, uncarpeted oak staircase. She would catch the heel of her slipper on the top step. I knew the sound her spine would make when it hit the edge of the landing, a wet, heavy crack, like a thick branch snapping under ice. In my previous life, I had been in the kitchen. I heard the thud, dropped a ceramic mug of coffee, and ran. I spent the next 30 years running. I dropped out of law school. I canceled my wedding. I moved back into this suffocating suburban house to be her full-time caregiver. I bathed her. I fed her. I turned her every 2 hours so she wouldn't get bed sores. I sacrificed my youth, my fertility, my entire existence on the altar of a good daughter's duty. And how did she repay me? When my brother Leo finally gambled away his business and needed cash, they hatched a plan. Martha dragged herself out of her wheelchair, just enough to bruise her own arms. She told the police I beat her. She told them I was siphoning her pension. Leo stood right beside the cops, crying crocodile tears, playing the horrified son who had arrived just in time to save his poor, paralyzed mother from her monster of a daughter. I was convicted. 30 years of devotion erased by one afternoon of perjury. She took my life, and when there was nothing left but the bones, she crushed those too. Audrey. The voice sliced through the floorboards, shrill, demanding, entitled. Audrey, get up here and help me with these boxes. Your brother is coming over for dinner, and I want this hallway cleared. My stomach clenched. Muscle memory dictated. I jump up jog, up the stairs, and do exactly as told. My legs twitched, but my mind was rooted in the cold concrete of a cell. I didn't move. Audrey, are you deaf? I stood up slowly. I didn't go to the stairs. I went to my closet. I pulled down an old canvas duffel bag. I didn't pack much. Just jean sweaters, my birth certificate, and the cash I had saved from my summer job money that in the other life went entirely to paying for her custom wheelchair ramp. I zipped the bag. The clock read 2:10 p.m. I walked out of my bedroom and stood at the bottom of the oak staircase. I looked up. Martha was at the top landing, wrestling with a cardboard box, overflowing with wool coats. She looked down at me, her face twisting into a familiar scowl. "Don't just stand there like an idiot," she snapped, panting slightly. "Get up here and take this." Leo likes the house tidy. Leo. Always Leo. The golden boy who never lifted a finger, never missed a party, never stayed to clean up the mess. "No," I said. My voice sounded strange. It wasn't the tired, placating whisper of a caregiver. It was steady. It was steel. Martha froze, the box resting on her hip. "Excuse me." I said no. "Put the box down, Mom, or carry it yourself." Her eyes widened in genuine shock, quickly replaced by furious indignation. "How dare you speak to me like that? You lazy, ungrateful brat. I do everything for this family." "Fine. I'll do it myself. I always have to do it myself." She yanked the box forward. She stepped toward the edge. The clock in the hallway ticked. 2:14 p.m. I could have stopped her. I could have walked up those stairs, taken the box, and altered the trajectory of her physical life. I could have saved her legs. But saving her legs meant cutting off my own. It meant another 30 years of emotional cannibalism. She adjusted her grip. Her right foot shifted. The heel of her blue velvet slipper caught the lip of the top stair. Time slowed to a crawl. I saw her weight pitch forward. I saw the box fly out of her hands, coats spilling like deflated bodies through the air. I saw her eyes lock onto mine, expecting me to lunge forward, expecting me to break her fall. I took one step back. She hit the third step with her shoulder. The sickening, hollow thud echoed through the foyer. She tumbled, a mess of limbs in floral housecoat bouncing against the hard oak. Then came the sound. The wet, heavy crack of her lower spine impacting the middle landing. She slid to a halt at the bottom, coming to rest inches from the toe of my boots. For a long moment, there was only the sound of my own breathing. Then, a ragged, high-pitched gasp tore from her throat. Her eyes were wide, pinned on the ceiling, dilated with shock and agony. "Audrey," she wheezed, "I can't feel my legs." I looked down at her. I felt no triumph. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing at all. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a pen, and grabbed a piece of junk mail off the side table. I wrote 3 words on the back. "Call your son." I dropped the envelope onto her chest. I stepped over her twisted legs, grabbed my duffel bag, and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. Cool autumn air hit my face the moment I crossed the threshold, stinging my cheeks and filling my lungs. I inhaled deeply, holding the breath until my chest ached. It smelled like burning leaves and exhaust fumes. It smelled like freedom. I walked down the driveway to my beat-up Honda Civic. The metal handle was cold. When I slid into the driver's seat, the worn fabric felt like absolute luxury. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Inside the house, Martha was lying on the floor. In my past life, this was the exact moment I was screaming into a phone, begging the 911 dispatcher to send an ambulance faster. This was the moment I was holding her hand, crying, promising her that I would never leave her side, that I would take care of everything. I put the car in drive and pulled out into the street. I didn't speed. I drove exactly the speed limit, watching the manicured lawns of my suburban neighborhood roll by like a movie set I was finally leaving. My mind was eerily calm. The panic I expected never materialized. Instead, a methodical cold logic took over. I had about 3 hours before Leo was supposed to show up for his precious home-cooked dinner. 3 hours before anyone found her. She wasn't bleeding out. The paralysis was immediate. The damage done the second her spine hit the oak. Lying there wouldn't kill her. It would just force her to realize exactly who she was alone in the dark with. I drove for an hour, heading north toward the city, putting as much concrete between us as possible. I pulled into a dingy roadside motel with a flickering neon sign, $25 a night. I paid in cash, taking the heavy brass key to room 114. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap pine cleaner. I tossed my duffel bag on the sagging mattress and walked straight to the bathroom mirror. I stared at myself for a long time. The girl looking back was a stranger. She had clear skin, bright eyes, and a posture that wasn't bowed by the weight of a 100-pound woman leaning on her. I touched my own cheek. It was real. I wasn't dead in a prison infirmary. I was 22 again. My stomach gave a sudden violent rumble. I realized I hadn't eaten. In the previous timeline, I didn't eat for 2 days after the accident. I existed on vending machine coffee in the ICU waiting room. I left the motel and walked across the street to a 24-hour diner. Sliding into a cracked vinyl booth, I picked up the laminated menu. I ordered a steak, medium rare, hash browns, eggs, a milkshake. When the waitress set the plate down, I nearly cried. Real food. Not the low-sodium pureed slop I had trained myself to stomach, because making 2 separate meals was too exhausting. I ate every bite. I savored the salt, the fat, the heat. I ate like a prisoner released from death row, which I supposed I was. By the time I finished, it was nearly 6 p.m. I walked over to the payphone near the restrooms. I dropped a quarter into the slot and dialed the house number. I didn't want to call, but I needed to ensure the chain of events shifted permanently. I needed to hand the baton to the golden child. The phone rang 4 times. Then the line clicked. Hello. The voice was frantic, breathless. Leo. Hello, Leo, I said, leaning against the graffiti-covered wall of the diner. Audrey, where the hell are you? I just got to Mom's house. The door was unlocked and she's on the floor. She fell. She can't move her legs. I called 911. They're on the way. You need to get home, right now. His voice was shrill, tinged with the distinct panic of a man who suddenly realized he might have to take responsibility for something. I'm not coming home, Leo. Silence stretched over the line, save for the static of the payphone and the distant wail of sirens in his background. What are you talking about? Mom is hurt, badly. You're her daughter? You live here. Where are you? I moved out, I said calmly. I packed my things and left. Today, he shrieked. You picked today to move out. Are you insane? She's paralyzed. Audrey, the paramedics just pulled up. I don't know what to do. I don't know her medical history. You handle this stuff. She's your mother too, Leo. I examined a chip in my fingernail polish. You're her favorite. You've always been her favorite. Now's your chance to shine. You can't do this. I have a business to run. I have a life. So do I replied softly. And I intend to keep it this time. This time? What the hell does that mean, Audrey? If you don't get down to the hospital right now, I swear to God. You'll what, Leo? I cut him off the steel, returning to my voice. You'll tell Mom I'm a bad daughter. She already thinks that. You'll cut me out of the will. There's no money left, Leo. She took out a second mortgage to pay for your failed restaurant. I know about it. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. He thought that was a secret. "The paramedics are coming in." Leo stammered, his bravado entirely stripped away. "Audrey, please. I can't wipe her ass. I can't do this. Better buy some gloves, little brother. She likes her tea lukewarm, and you have to turn her every 2 hours, or her skin breaks down. Good luck." I hung up the phone. The heavy clunk of the receiver felt like a gavel coming down. Case closed. I walked out of the diner and back into the cool night air. The neon lights of the motel buzzed loudly in the darkness. I had a few $100s a car and a brain full of 30 years of future knowledge. I knew which companies would boom. I knew which neighborhoods would gentrify. I knew exactly how to build an empire. But more importantly, I knew exactly who my family was. Let Leo be the martyr. Let Martha bask in the glow of her golden boy. I had given them my life once. They weren't getting a single second of this one. Morning arrived with the aggressive rattle of a garbage truck backing into the alley outside my motel window. I didn't groan. I didn't pull the thin, scratchy blankets over my head. I sat bolt upright, my lungs expanding, with a sharp intake of cold, pine-scented air. For the first time in 30 years, I woke up to a sound that wasn't a bell ringing from a sickbed. I swung my legs over the side of the mattress. My joints moved with fluid, silent grace. It was a physical luxury I was determined never to take for granted again. I opened my duffel bag and emptied the contents onto the faded floral bedspread. 3 pairs of jeans, 5 sweaters, a handful of underwear, my birth certificate, a social security card, and exactly $3,420 in neatly banded cash. In my past life, this money sweated over during double shifts at a local diner went straight to a contractor who installed a motorized chairlift on our oak staircase. This time, it was my seed money. It was late October 1996. The internet was a noisy dial-up novelty to most people, a digital Wild West of ugly graphics and slow-loading text. But I knew what it would become. I knew about the dot-com bubble. More importantly, I knew exactly when it would burst and which titans would survive the fallout. I didn't need to be a billionaire overnight. I just needed enough capital to build a fortress around myself, a wall of wealth so high my family could never climb over it. I dressed quickly in a pair of rigid denim jeans and a heavy wool sweater. I had errands to run. My first stop was a local public library. The heavy wooden doors squeaked as I pushed them open, welcoming me into a sanctuary of dust and quiet. I logged onto one of the chunky desktop computers, listening to the screeching handshake of the modem connecting to the web. I spent 3 hours researching discount brokerages that allowed telephone and online trading. I opened an account. I wired $3,000 into it, keeping the rest for food and gas. I bought shares in a small, struggling tech company based out of Cupertino that everyone thought was dead in the water. They didn't know Steve was coming back. I did. While I was securing my future, Leo was drowning in his. I didn't need to be in the hospital waiting room to know exactly how it was playing out. The script was burned into my memory. Right about now, the orthopedic surgeon was delivering the final verdict: complete severance of the spinal cord at the T10 vertebrae, permanent paraplegia, loss of bowel and bladder control. I could perfectly picture the scene. Martha lying flat on a sterile hospital bed, a halo brace screwed into her skull, her face pale and slack with painkillers. Leo standing beside her, wearing yesterday's clothes, sweating through his expensive cologne. In my previous life, when the doctor delivered the news, Martha had wailed. I had held her hand until my knuckles turned white. Leo had patted my shoulder, muttered something about needing to call his business partner, and vanished for 3 days. This time, Leo had no buffer. He was the one standing there when the hospital social worker walked in with a clipboard thick with discharge paperwork. He was the one who had to listen to the brutal, unvarnished reality of 24-hour care. Catheterization, every 4 to 6 hours to prevent renal failure. Bowel management, manual extraction daily. Skin integrity, turning the patient every 2 hours, day and night, to prevent necrotic bed sores. Physical therapy, daily passive range of motion exercises to keep the dead limbs from contracting. I knew the exact moment the color would drain from Leo's face. He was a man who couldn't remember to take his own trash to the curb. The concept of manual bowel extraction would send him into a localized panic attack. He would try to hire a nurse. He would ask about Medicare. The social worker would kindly, firmly explain that long-term custodial care was not covered. It was out of pocket. And Martha, thanks to Leo's failed restaurant venture, was functionally broke. I left the library and drove to a cheap diner on the edge of the city. I ordered a black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. I ate it slowly, relishing the tart sweetness, the flaky crust. I knew what Martha was doing right now. She was demanding me. She was telling the nurses, the doctors, and anyone who would listen that her daughter was on her way. She was probably telling them I was a nurse myself, or at least a nursing student, and that I would handle everything. She was weaving the narrative of the devoted daughter, completely oblivious to the fact that the daughter had severed the strings. By the end of the week, I had rented a tiny, barren studio apartment over a dry cleaner. The air smelled perpetually of starch and chemical solvents, but the door had a deadbolt, and only I possessed the key. I found a job waiting tables at a high-end steakhouse downtown. The tips were entirely cash, and the clientele were wealthy businessmen who talked loudly about their portfolios after 3 martinis. I listened. I took mental notes. I compared their boasting to my future knowledge. My broker account began to inch upward, slowly at first, then with accelerating momentum. I bought a cheap mattress, setting it directly on the hardwood floor. I bought a single lamp. I didn't buy a television or a radio. I wanted silence. I needed the quiet to decompress 30 years of compressed rage. Every night I lay on that mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, and tracked the days on a mental calendar. Day 10. Martha is transferred to an inpatient rehab facility. Day 21. Insurance cuts off the rehab funding. Day 25. Discharge day. The day she comes home. The day Leo's life officially ends, and mine truly begins. Snow turned the city into a sprawling grid of gray slush by February. The harsh winter winds whipped off the concrete, biting through my wool coat as I walked home from the steakhouse. It had been 4 months since the stairs, 4 months since I walked out the front door. My life had settled into a rigorous, profitable rhythm. I worked nights at the restaurant, banking every dollar. During the day, I traded. The Cupertino tech stock had rallied beautifully. I had diversified into a burgeoning online bookstore that was just starting to gather serious institutional attention. My net worth had crossed the $50,000 mark. In 1997, for a 22-year-old with zero debt, it was a small fortune. I pushed open the heavy glass door to my apartment building, stomping the snow off my boots. I checked my mail, mostly junk a bank statement, a flyer for a local pizza place. I climbed the 2 flights of stairs, my keys jingling in my hand. I turned the corner to my hallway and stopped dead. Sitting on the floor, his back propped against my apartment door, was Leo. He didn't look like the golden boy anymore. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled, stained corduroy jacket. His hair, usually styled with expensive pomade, was greasy and matted flat against his skull. Deep purple bags hung heavily under his bloodshot eyes. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 4 months. I felt a sharp, cold spike of adrenaline, but I pushed it down. I walked toward him, my boots clicking sharply against the linoleum. He looked up, blinking slowly, as if his brain was struggling to process my presence. "Audrey?" he croaked. His voice was hoarse, raspy. "You're blocking my door, Leo." I didn't ask how he found me. It didn't matter. He was a desperate man, and desperate men find a way. I simply stood over him, holding my keys, waiting for him to move. He scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. He smelled of stale beer, unwashed clothes, and a faint, acrid undercurrent of urine. The caregiver's perfume. I knew it intimately. "You have to come home," he said, skipping any greeting. It wasn't a request. It was a panicked demand. "You have to come back right now." I unlocked my deadbolt, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. I didn't invite him in, but I didn't close the door on his face either. I turned around, unbuttoning my coat. "I don't live there anymore. I live here." "Are you out of your mind?" Leo exploded, stepping over the threshold. His hands were shaking. "Do you have any idea what it's been like? Do you have any concept of what I'm dealing with?" "I have a very clear concept," I said, calmly hanging my coat on a hook. "She screams all night," he yelled, pacing the small footprint of my living room. "She rings this stupid little bell every 10 minutes. I haven't slept more than 3 hours a night since November. My business is failing because I can't be at the office. I'm wiping her. I'm doing things a son should never have to do. A daughter shouldn't have to do them either." I pointed out, walking into my tiny kitchenette to pour a glass of water. "You're a woman. You're supposed to be good at this nursing crap." I took a slow sip of water. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. Even now, drowning in his own misery, he couldn't fathom that my life had value outside of serving him and Martha. "I'm not a nurse, Leo. I was a law student. Remember, before I dropped out to work full-time, so you could borrow against the house?" He flinched. "We need money, Audrey. If you won't come back and do the physical work, you need to pay for a home health aide. They want $2,000 a week for round-the-clock care. I don't have it. Neither do I." It was a lie, but it was the only truth he was getting. "Bullshit. You've been working. You didn't take your car. You took cash. Mom said you had a savings account." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with a manic desperation. "You owe her. She raised you. She fed me, clothed me, and expected a return on her investment." I countered, setting the glass down on the counter. "I'm not paying for a nurse, Leo. Sell the house." "I can't sell the house," he screamed, his voice cracking. "There's no equity. Mom took out a second mortgage to float my restaurant, and I haven't made a payment in 6 months. The bank is threatening to foreclose." There it was. The dominoes were falling exactly as I knew they would, only this time I wasn't crushed beneath them. "Then let them foreclose," I said. "Put her in a state-run nursing facility on Medicaid." Leo stared at me, horrified. "A state facility? Are you insane? Have you seen those places? They smell like bleach and death. She'd be sharing a room with 3 other people. She'd lose her mind. She told me she'd rather die. Then she has a choice to make, doesn't she? I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. She can adapt, or she can be miserable, but she is not your responsibility, and she is certainly not mine. She's your mother. She's a woman who gave birth to me, I corrected sharply. And you are a man who stood by and watched her drain me dry. You want to be the hero, Leo, go be the hero. But you don't get to use my money or my hands to do it. He lunged forward, grabbing my upper arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by months of sleep deprivation and suppressed rage. You listen to me, you selfish little bitch. I didn't scream. I didn't pull away. I simply looked down at his hand, then back up to his face. My eyes were completely dead. If you don't take your hand off me in the next 3 seconds, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper, I will break your fingers, call the police, and have you arrested for assault. And then, who will turn Martha at 2 a.m? Leo froze. He looked at my face, searching for a bluff. He found nothing. He slowly uncurled his fingers and stepped back, his chest heaving. You're a monster, he whispered. No, I replied, opening my front door and gesturing toward the hallway. I'm just finally matching the family energy. Get out. He walked out, his shoulders slumped, defeated. I shut the heavy wooden door, threw the deadbolt, and listened to his footsteps echo down the stairwell. I walked over to the window and watched him trudge out into the freezing slush, a broken man returning to a broken house. I felt my pulse steady. I felt lighter. The haunting was over. Now, the empire building could truly begin. Spring of 1999 smelled like fresh asphalt and money. By my 25th birthday, I was sitting on a net worth just shy of $4 million. The dot-com bubble was inflating with dizzying speed, and I rode the wave with the clinical precision of a time traveler. I bought low sold before the peaks and funneled the profits into solid, boring assets. Municipal bonds, undervalued commercial real estate, things that wouldn't evaporate when the digital gold rush inevitably crashed. I had moved out of the chemical-scented studio and into a sprawling loft in a converted warehouse district. The walls were exposed brick, the floors polished concrete. It was vast, empty, and entirely mine. No floral prints, no knickknacks, no medical equipment clogging the hallways. I hired a lawyer named Sullivan, a bulldog in a gray suit, who handled my acquisitions through a series of blind LLCs. I liked my privacy. I preferred being a ghost in the financial machine. On a rainy Tuesday in April, Sullivan called me on my new cell phone. The property on Elm Street hit the county foreclosure registry this morning. He said, his voice crackling over the primitive cellular network. The bank finally ran out of patience. Auction is set for the 1st of next month on the courthouse steps. My childhood home, the prison where I had spent 30 years of my previous life. What's the starting bid? I asked, watching the rain streak down my massive industrial windows. 80,000. It's a tear down, Audrey. The inspector's notes mention severe water damage, black mold in the basement, and a roof that's caving in. The owners completely stopped maintenance about 2 years ago. 2 years. Exactly how long Leo had been in charge. He hadn't just neglected Martha. He had neglected the only asset they had left to their name. Buy it, I said. Sullivan paused. I strongly advise against this. It's a money pit in a stagnant neighborhood. I don't want it for the structure, Sullivan. I want the land. It's a double-corner lot. buy it through the holding company and immediately file the eviction paperwork. I want them out. Understood. I didn't buy the house out of sentimentality. I bought it because I wanted to be the one to hold the deed when the final curtain fell. I wanted to control the perimeter of my own closure. The eviction was scheduled for the 3rd week of May. I didn't plan on going, but on the morning of the lockout, a restless energy hijacked my nervous system. I put on a pair of dark sunglasses, climbed into my recently purchased sedan, and drove to the suburbs. I parked 2 blocks away, under the shade of a massive oak tree. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, suspended in a suffocating middle-class amber. But my old house was a rotting tooth in an otherwise pristine smile. The gutters were hanging off the fascia boards. The lawn was knee-high, choked with dandelions and crabgrass. The custom wheelchair ramp I had paid for in another life was nowhere to be seen. Leo had never bothered to build one. At exactly 9 a.m., a white county sheriff's cruiser pulled into the cracked driveway. 2 deputies stepped out. I rolled down my window, letting the humid morning air filter into the car. I watched. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. Leo emerged. If he looked bad at my apartment 2 years ago, he looked entirely destroyed now. He was rail-thin, his clothes hanging off his frame like rags on a scarecrow. He carried 2 black garbage bags, tossing them haphazardly onto the damp grass. He didn't look angry. He just looked vacant. Then came Martha. The deputies had to carry her down the 3 front steps. They held her under the arms and by the knees, treating her with professional detached caution. She was screaming. Even from 2 blocks away, I could hear the shrill, ragged pitch of her voice. She was thrashing, pointing at the deputies, pointing at Leo, her face purple with rage. She was confined to a rusted standard-issue hospital chair, not the custom ergonomic motorized one she had demanded I buy her. She looked frail, her hair entirely white and unkempt, but the venom in her gestures was undiluted. Leo ignored her. He walked to his beat-up sedan, a car that looked like it was held together by duct tape and prayers, and opened the passenger door. The deputies wheeled Martha over. It took them 5 agonizing minutes to awkwardly fold her rigid legs and hoist her into the seat. She slapped Leo's hand away when he tried to adjust her seatbelt. I sat in my car, my hands resting loosely on the leather steering wheel. I expected to feel a surge of vindication. I expected the cinematic rush of triumph, the swelling soundtrack of a revenge, perfectly executed. Instead, I felt nothing but a profound, hollow exhaustion. This was what I had traded my entire life for in the other timeline. This miserable, toxic dynamic. I had let myself rot in a cell for these 2 broken people. Watching them now, I realized they didn't need my help to destroy themselves. They were entirely capable of doing it on their own. The poison was always in them. I had just been the filter absorbing it. The sheriff taped a neon orange notice to the front door and locked it. Leo started his engine. A cloud of blue smoke coughed from the tailpipe as he backed out of the driveway, carrying Martha away toward the state-funded facility that awaited her. I rolled up my window, put the car in drive, and headed back to the city. I called Sullivan on the way. "They're out," I told him. "Send the demolition crew tomorrow. Tear it down to the foundation." "And the lot?" he asked. "Sell it to the city. Let them turn it into a community garden." I hung up the phone. The house would be gone by Friday. Winter of 2001 hit the city like a hammer. Snowbanks piled high against the concrete, turning black with exhaust by noon. The world was different now. The dot-com bubble had violently burst wiping out fortunes overnight. I had liquidated 70% of my tech holdings in late '99, pivoting into defensive stocks and real estate. While Wall Street bled, I slept soundly on high thread count sheets. My life was a masterclass in aggressive insulation. I had a small circle of brilliant, ruthless colleagues, a passport full of stamps and zero attachments that could drag me backward. Then the letter arrived. It was printed on cheap, gray recycled paper, bearing the seal of the State Department of Health and Human Services. It had been forwarded twice before finding its way to my loft. Dear Audrey, you are listed as the secondary emergency contact for Martha. The primary contact, Leo, has been unreachable for 90 consecutive days. Under state law, we must inform you of a significant decline in the patient's condition. I read the boilerplate text while standing over my granite kitchen island, sipping black coffee. Leo had vanished. It didn't surprise me. The man had the spine of a jellyfish. He had likely dumped her at the facility, endured a few weeks of her vitriolic complaints, and finally snapped. He was probably living in a trailer park in Florida, under an assumed name, drinking himself to death. I should have thrown the letter away. Legally, I had no obligation. I hadn't signed any admission paperwork. I was a ghost, but a dark, morbid curiosity anchored my feet to the floor. I needed to see the final destination. I needed to look at the endgame of her entitlement, not out of malice, but to definitively sever the final, invisible thread binding me to her. The county care facility was located 40 miles outside the city limits, a sprawling, flat brick building that looked more like a medium security prison than a place of healing. I parked my car in the icy lot and walked through the sliding glass doors. The heat inside was oppressive, blasting from ancient radiators. The smell hit me immediately, a thick, unbreathable miasma of boiled cabbage industrial bleach and the unmistakable sweet decay of neglected human bodies. I signed the visitor log under the watchful eye of an exhausted nurse who didn't even ask for my ID. "Room 412, she muttered, pointing down a flickering fluorescent hallway. "Bed B." I walked slowly, my boots squeaking on the linoleum. The sounds of the facility were deeply unsettling. Low moans, the rhythmic beeping of outdated monitors, a television blaring a game show to an empty day room. Room 412 was a cramped beige box holding 3 beds, separated by thin, faded privacy curtains. Bed A was empty, stripped to the mattress. Bed C held a woman curled into a fetal position, staring blankly at the wall. I stepped up to Bed B. Martha was lying flat on her back. She was so small. The imposing, terrifying matriarch of my childhood had withered into a fragile collection of bones, wrapped in translucent, bruised skin. Her hair was thin and greasy, her fingernails yellowed and overgrown. A feeding tube snaked into her nose, taped haphazardly to her cheek. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and rattling. I stood at the foot of her bed for a long time. In my past life, this was me. I would have been the one washing her hair, trimming her nails, fighting with doctors to get her better care. I would have died in a cell because of the woman lying in this bed. Her eyelids fluttered, then peeled open. The milky irises darted around the room before locking onto my face. For a second, there was no recognition. Then her pupils dilated, her cracked lips parted. "Audrey," she rasped. Her voice was a dry whisper, devoid of its former booming authority. "Hello, Mom." She tried to lift her head, but lacked the strength letting it fall back against the flat pillow. You came. I knew you'd come. Leo left me here. He stole my purse, and he left. I know, I said evenly. A tear leaked from the corner of her eye, tracking through the deep wrinkles of her temple. It was the first time I had ever seen her cry, without an audience to manipulate. It's terrible here. She whimpered, her bony fingers twitching against the thin cotton blanket. They don't answer the bell. They leave me in the dark. You have to take me home, Audrey. You have to get me out of here. She was still doing it, even broken, even abandoned by her golden child. She expected me to fall into line. She expected the dutiful daughter to sweep in and absorb her pain. I can't take you home, Mom. Why not? She demanded, a flash of the old irritation sparking in her eyes. You're my daughter. It's your job. You don't have a home anymore, I said, my voice perfectly still level. The bank foreclosed on Elm Street 2 years ago. I bought the lot. I had the house bulldozed. It's a community garden now. Martha stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open. The monitor next to her bed beeped a little faster. You tore down my house. Your house was a rotting shell, Mom, just like this family. I leveled it so nothing toxic could grow there anymore. You're lying, she hissed, though the panic in her chest told me she knew I wasn't. You owe me. I gave you life, and I gave it back, I replied, stepping closer, gripping the cold metal railing of the bed. I walked away on the stairs, Mom. I walked away because I knew exactly what you would do to me if I stayed. You chose Leo. You always chose Leo. And now you have exactly the life he provided for you. Please, she sobbed, the anger evaporating into pure, unadulterated terror. Please don't leave me here. I'll be good. I won't yell. Please, Audrey. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folded letter from the state. I placed it on her bedside table, right next to a plastic cup of lukewarm water. I came to tell you goodbye, Martha. Officially, I'm signing the paperwork at the front desk to remove myself as your emergency contact. When you die, the state will bury you. I won't be at the funeral. I turned my back to her. Audrey, she shrieked, the sound tearing her throat. Audrey, come back. You can't do this. I'm your mother. I walked out of room 412. I didn't slow down. I walked down the fluorescent hallway, through the sliding glass doors, and back out into the freezing, beautiful winter air. I climbed into my car, turned the key, and drove away, leaving the screaming ghost behind me forever. September 2008 broke the global economy in half. Wall Street bled out on the pavement, banks shuttered their doors, and millions of people watched their pensions vaporize overnight. I watched it happen from the quiet sanctuary of my glass-walled office, entirely untouched. I had seen the subprime mortgage crisis coming years in advance. While others gorged on toxic debt, I hoarded cash. When the bottom finally fell out, I became a very quiet, very ruthless buyer of distressed assets. By 34, I owned a portfolio of boring recession-proof companies, waste management, commercial logistics, industrial supply chains, things people needed regardless of what the stock market did. One of those recent acquisitions was a massive commercial laundry facility on the industrial outskirts of the city. It serviced budget hotels and local hospitals running 24 hours a day. The previous owner had mismanaged the payroll and defaulted on his loans. I bought the debt for pennies on the dollar and took over the operation on a brisk Tuesday morning. I arrived unannounced, accompanied only by my operations director, a sharp-eyed woman named Chloe. We walked onto the production floor. The heat was instantly suffocating, a humid wall of steam, smelling fiercely of industrial bleach and damp cotton. Massive steel drums rumbled, spinning hundreds of pounds of wet linens, vibrating the concrete floor beneath my designer boots. "We need to cut 20% of the redundant floor staff," Chloe yelled over the deafening roar of the machines. She pointed toward a row of men dragging heavy canvas carts full of wet towels. "Starting with the underperformers. I have the shift logs here." I nodded, watching the laborers move. It was grueling physical work. My eyes drifted down the line and stopped. The man pushing the third cart was moving slower than the rest. He wore a faded gray t-shirt, stained dark with sweat around the collar. His shoulders were severely hunched, his spine bowed under the weight of a life he clearly wasn't built for. He had a heavy limp favoring his right leg as he shoved the wheeled canvas bin toward a giant folding machine. He paused to wipe his forehead with the back of a calloused hand, turning his face toward the main aisle. My breath caught on a sharp hook of recognition. It was Leo. He was only 36, but he looked 50. His hairline had entirely receded, leaving a patchy crown of thinning, greasy strands. The arrogant, handsome features of the golden boy had melted into a permanent, exhausted grimace. Deep grooves bracketed his mouth, and his skin had the sallow, grayish tint of chronic stress and cheap liquor. I stood perfectly still in the center of the aisle. I didn't hide. I simply waited. Leo pushed his cart forward, his head down. He was 10 feet away when he finally looked up to see the new owner touring the floor. His bloodshot eyes scanned my tailored wool coat, my leather briefcase, my pristine posture. Then his gaze snapped to my face. He froze. His hands slipped off the canvas rim of the cart. "Audrey," he whispered. The industrial noise swallowed the word, but I read his lips perfectly. Chloe noticed the man staring and stepped forward, frowning. "Is there a problem here?" she barked at him. "Keep the line moving." Leo didn't look at Chloe. He took a stumbling step toward me. He looked like a drowning man who had just spotted a cruise ship. "Audrey, my God!" He choked out his voice, cracking with a pathetic, desperate hope. "It's you. It's really you. What are you doing here?" I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I looked at him with the same detached calculation I used to review a balance sheet. "I own this facility, Leo. I bought it yesterday." The words hit him physically. He swayed on his feet, his jaw dropping as his exhausted brain struggled to reconcile the sister he had treated as a disposable servant with the wealthy executive standing before him. He looked down at his own stained shirt, his ruined hands, and then back up at my coat. The disparity was a brutal, unarguable metric of our choices. "You own it," he stammered. A sudden, ugly spark of entitlement flared in his dull eyes, the old Leo clawing his way back to the surface. "Then you have to help me. Audrey, you have to help me out. I'm drowning. I live in a weekly motel. The pay here is garbage. Give me a manager position. Cut me a check. We're family. We share genetics," I corrected softly, stepping just close enough so he could hear the absolute zero in my tone. "We are not family. You did this to me," he suddenly hissed, leaning forward, spittle flying from his lips. "If you hadn't walked out, I wouldn't have lost the restaurant. I wouldn't have gone bankrupt, paying for her medication before she went into the state home. You ruined my life." It was staggering. Over a decade later, stripped of his youth, his wealth, and his dignity, He still completely refused to carry the weight of his own failures. It was always my fault. It would always be my fault. You went bankrupt because you were a lazy, incompetent businessman who couldn't balance a ledger. I said, my voice cutting through the steam like a razor. You lost your life because you finally had to live it yourself without me buffering the consequences. I didn't ruin you, Leo. I just stopped saving you. His face crumpled, the anger giving way to a raw, weeping panic. Please, I have nothing. Mom has been in that hellhole for 10 years. I can't even afford to visit her. Then don't, I said. I turned my back to him and looked at Chloe. She was watching the exchange with silent, professional curiosity. Chloe, I said clearly, review the shift logs. If this man meets the daily quota, he keeps his job. If he falls below, it terminate him with the rest of the underperformers. No special treatment, no severance. Understood. Chloe nodded. Audrey, you can't do this. Leo screamed behind me, grabbing the sleeve of my coat with a wet, soapy hand. I stopped. I didn't look at him. I simply stared at his hand until he realized the danger in his grip and slowly let go. I walked out of the laundry facility, leaving him standing in the stifling heat, chained to his canvas cart, completely and utterly alone in the mess he had made. April 2012 arrived with unseasonable warmth, coaxing green buds from the frozen city branches weeks ahead of schedule. I was 38. I was healthy. My joints didn't ache from lifting dead weight. My lungs weren't compromised by the smell of decay. I had built a fortress of absolute autonomy, and I lived inside it with a deep, uncompromising peace. The final piece of the past arrived on a Thursday. It was a standard white envelope delivered by certified mail to my attorney's office and forwarded to my desk. The return address belonged to the State Department of Health and Human Services. I opened it with a silver letter opener. It was a standardized form, printed on cheap paper, with the blank spaces filled in by a dot matrix printer. Patient name, Martha. Date of death, April 14th, 2012. Time, 3:42 a.m. Cause of death, congestive heart failure / complications from prolonged immobility. There was a second page, a waiver. Because I was legally on file as her closest blood relative, despite severing my emergency contact status years prior, the state required my signature to release her remains for a pauper's cremation. If I didn't claim the ashes within 30 days, they would be interred in a county lot. I uncapped my heavy fountain pen. I signed the waiver on the indicated line, waiving all rights to the remains. I slid it into the return envelope, sealed it, and tossed it into my outbox. It took less than 30 seconds. There was no sudden rush of tears. There was no crushing weight in my chest. I didn't feel the urge to drink or scream or seek out a therapist to unpack a sudden wave of complicated grief. I just felt done. The long, exhausting equation had finally balanced out to zero. I left my office early that afternoon. I drove my car, a quiet, heavily armored German sedan, out of the city limits and toward the suburbs. I hadn't been back to Elm Street since the morning the sheriff locked Leo out. The neighborhood had aged. The houses looked smaller, the trees thicker. I parked down the street and walked the last block. Where my childhood prison used to stand there was now a thriving community garden. The city had done a beautiful job. The rotting foundation of the house had been dug out and filled with rich, dark topsoil, Wooden planter boxes were arranged in neat geometric rows. It was late spring, and the garden was exploding with life. Bright green tomato vines climbed wooden trellises where the living room used to be. A massive patch of yellow sunflowers stood exactly where the uncarpeted oak staircase had once dominated the foyer. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands pushed deep into the pockets of my trench coat, watching the wind rustle the leaves. A woman in her 60s, wearing a canvas apron and thick gardening gloves, was kneeling near the sunflowers, pulling weeds. She noticed me standing there and offered a warm, polite smile. "Beautiful day for it," she called out, standing up and wiping her forehead. "It is," I agreed, walking slightly closer to the low wooden fence. "The garden looks incredible. You've done a lot of work." "Oh, it's a neighborhood effort," she said proudly, stripping off her gloves. "Took us a few years to get the soil right. Used to be a real eyesore here. A derelict house. Nasty mold problem roof caving in. The city finally tore it down about 10 years ago. Best thing that ever happened to this block." "I imagine so," I said. "They say the people who live there just let it rot from the inside out," she continued, shaking her head. "Shame, really. But I guess some things have to be completely destroyed before anything good can grow in their place." "That's exactly right," I said, a genuine smile finally touching the corners of my mouth. "It's fertilizer now." She laughed a bright, easy sound. "Exactly. Well, I have to get back to the root vegetables before the sun goes down. Have a wonderful afternoon." "You too." I turned away from the garden and walked back to my car. In my previous life, I died at the age of 52. My body gave out in a sterile prison infirmary, worn down to the bone by a lifetime of carrying the crushing weight of a mother who despised me and a brother who used me. I had choked on my last breath, staring at a concrete ceiling, entirely consumed by the bitter, inescapable injustice of it all. I unlocked my car and slid into the leather driver's seat. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. There was no gray in my hair. The hollow, haunted look that had defined my previous face was completely gone, replaced by the sharp, clear gaze of a woman who owned her own destiny. I had 30 years ripped away from me once. I came back, and I took every single second of it back. I didn't save Martha. I didn't redeem Leo. I didn't heal my toxic family with the magic of a second chance. I let them fall. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving Elm Street in the rearview mirror for the final time. The road ahead was clear. The sky was wide open, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was entirely free. 17 years. That's how long it took for Leo to finally exhaust every ounce of his borrowed luck. By 2015, I was 41. My holding company had just acquired a massive block of commercial real estate in the financial district, cementing my portfolio in the 9-figure range. I was sitting at my mahogany desk, reviewing lease agreements, when Sullivan buzzed my private line. "We've been served," my attorney said. He didn't sound worried. He sounded genuinely amused. "By whom?" I asked, signing my name at the bottom of a heavy parchment page. "Leo. He found a bottom-feeding personal injury lawyer willing to take a swing on contingency. They're filing a civil suit. He's claiming you embezzled funds from your mother's estate in 1996 and used it as seed money for your current enterprise. He wants half of everything." I set my fountain pen down. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "Does he have proof?" "He has a narrative," Sullivan scoffed. "He claims you stole $30,000 in cash from a floorboard safe on the day Martha fell. There was no floorboard safe. There was only my diner waitressing money, which amounted to barely over $3,000. Leo was projecting his own financial fantasies onto my success. He needed a reason why I was a multimillionaire, and he was washing hotel sheets in the reality that I simply worked smarter wasn't a pill he could ever swallow. "Schedule the deposition," I told Sullivan. "Don't settle. Don't offer a single dime to make it go away. I want to see him." We met in a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room 2 months later. I wore a tailored navy suit and a watch that cost more than the house we grew up in. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded securely on the polished table. The heavy glass door opened. Leo walked in. He was only 43, but his body looked ready for the grave. His hair was entirely gone, revealing a scalp spotted with deep sun damage. He wore a cheap, oversized tan suit that smelled faintly of mothballs and stale tobacco. He had a severe tremor in his left hand, and his breathing was shallow, punctuated by a wet, rattling cough. His lawyer, a sweaty man in a cheap polyester tie, looked immediately intimidated by Sullivan's cold presence. Leo didn't look at me at first. He focused on a styrofoam cup of water, his hands shaking as he pulled it toward him. When he finally lifted his eyes, the hatred in them was dull, muted by decades of relentless failure. "You look well, Audrey," he rasped. "And you look exactly how you've earned the right to look, Leo." His jaw clenched. "You owe me. You left me with her. You took the money and ran." Sullivan opened a thick leather binder. He didn't waste time. He systematically, brutally dismantled the claim. He presented bank records from 1996, proving my initial investment capital came solely from my documented W-2 wages and cash tips. He produced the county foreclosure notices from Elm Street, proving the house was entirely devoid of equity long before I left. He laid out the timeline of Leo's bankruptcies, tax liens, and unpaid child support claims from a brief, disastrous marriage I hadn't even known about. Within 20 minutes, Leo's lawyer was packing up his briefcase. The man realized he was not only going to lose, but he could face severe judicial sanctions for bringing a demonstrably fraudulent case to the table. "We withdraw the claim," the lawyer muttered, snapping his briefcase shut. He walked out without another word, leaving his client sitting alone at the table. Leo didn't move. He stared at the glossy wood grain, his chest heaving. "I have cancer," he whispered. The room went completely silent. Sullivan glanced at me, his face an impassive mask, waiting for my cue. "Lung," Leo continued, his voice cracking violently. "Stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months. I can't afford the treatments. I can't afford a hospice bed. I'm going to die in a public ward, Audrey." He looked up, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. He was playing his final card. He wasn't suing me for justice. He was suing me for survival. He was hoping to extort enough cash to buy himself a comfortable exit. I looked at the man who had stood by while our mother framed me for abuse, the man who had cried crocodile tears in a courtroom, while the judge sentenced me to 30 years in a cage. "You reap what you sow, Leo," I said quietly. "You can't just let me die like a dog," he shouted, slapping his trembling hand against the table. "You have hundreds of millions. It would be nothing to you. A drop in the bucket. You are my sister." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "I had a brother once." I said, my voice empty of any malice, carrying only the absolute cold of deep space. He died a long time ago. I'm just looking at a ghost. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. He passed away 4 months later. I didn't attend the funeral. I didn't send flowers. I spent the day finalizing the paperwork for the Second Chance Initiative, a nonprofit foundation I fully funded. It provides massive, no-strings-attached grants to young caregivers, specifically women who need an exit strategy. It pays for nursing care education and relocation. It provides the legal support to untangle them from abusive dependencies. It gives them the baton I had to forge myself from scratch. My life in the old timeline was stolen. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation behind concrete walls, surrounded by women who had also been discarded by the world. But standing on the balcony of my penthouse tonight, looking out over the glittering grid of the city, I inhaled the crisp evening air. My lungs were clear. My conscience was clean. The stars above mirrored the streetlights below, a perfect reflection of a world I now owned. I had broken the cycle, and in the ashes of the family that tried to burn me, I had built a kingdom. Audrey's journey is the ultimate testament to the unapologetic power of walking away. Sometimes the most profound revenge isn't loud or violent. It's simply refusing to be a victim and building an untouchable life. She stopped setting herself on fire to keep toxic people warm and let karma handle the rest. Her empire was built on the foundation of the very boundaries her family tried to destroy. If you love this deep, gritty story of reborn justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible daily story.